Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for that kind introduction, and I want to thank all the Teach for America people and thank you for teaching for America. It's so important what these young people are doing. I also see some of my friends with their red jackets from City Year here, and I want to give them a big shout out. One of the best things we did in New York is partner with City Year and the work they're doing. Now, when I see people like Michael and John White and others and Teach for America and City Year, it gives me enormous hope for the future of this country. I'm so pleased to be here today, Steve. You've done a remarkable thing pulling everybody together. I have a deep commitment now to Louisiana. I not only came here to talk at the LSU Law School graduation a few months ago, but I found myself pulling, uncharacteristically, for LSU football this year. And I must say, I rooted for them against Alabama in both games, but I apparently didn't root hard enough in the second game. But I also have a deep commitment because a man I love, who I had the privilege to work closely with, another TFA alum, John White, has now been selected as a commissioner in this state. He's an extraordinary educational leader, and more important than that, he's an extraordinary human being. I've been privileged in my 65 years to work closely with many people. Few have the passion, the dignity, and the commitment to make the world a better place as he exits it someday from the world that he came into. And his spirit is really indomitable, and I think you're privileged and fortunate to have him here in his state. He replaces a good friend of mine, Paul Pastorak, who was an educational leader, and as you've heard, along with Tony Bennett, did remarkable things in this country when a lot of their colleagues really missed their calling. I'm also pleased to say that even as we let John come to Louisiana from New York, we recruited one of your natives from here in Baton Rouge, Mark Sternberg, who's sitting over here. He's one of my deputies. Mark I got to know him when I asked him to start a school. He was a principal. Started a school up in the Bronx in a very high-needs community. I was privileged to be at their first graduation 4 years later when they graduated 96% of their kids. The expected graduation rate for that school should have been about 40%. So don't tell me you can't get very different outcomes with the exact same kids. Congratulations, Mark. It's also a privilege to be with the people who have really talked to you this morning and will talk to you this afternoon. I have to say to you, I've been at many, many of these events during the past decade since school reform has become my passion. And I have to say, I've never been at one quite like this one. I thought this was about education reform, but at various times this morning, I thought we were at a revival meeting. I really did. And thank you, Howard. Amen, my brother. I mean, I don't go to many meetings where people sit this close, stand up and say, I'm a white guy. I mean, what kind of, I mean, this is like a whole generation with a new explanation, you know? But I mean, I got to tell you, Tony is doing what he's doing. Obviously, Jeb, what he did down in Florida, your governor's speech. I want to say, Mary, I'm so proud that you're here and to sit here all day long. That's really atypical, so true of so many of the people here. And I've had the privilege to work closely with Mary, both when I was in the Clinton administration and subsequently on school issues. And she's living proof of something I believe deeply, that this issue is larger than partisan politics. It's larger than anything we face. And we're not going to all agree on everything on every single issue, but I hope we all agree that, in the President's words, for education, we need the fierce urgency of now. Our kids really depend on that. Now, as I said, it's been quite a morning, and we're at a really pivotal point in this meeting. And as I got up to speak, I was thinking of Adlai Stevens' famous words. He once got up to speak, he said, you know, unfortunately, we reached a point in the agenda where everything that could be said has been said. He said, unfortunately for you all, not everybody's having a chance to say it. So while you're enjoying your lunch, let me take a shot at putting my spin on what all these brilliant speakers have said this morning. You know, I looked around carefully and I listened, and there was one takeaway, which I'll come back to at the end. There was one takeaway that's really important to me. There were some moments this morning, the level of candor, as I say, was extraordinary. There were some moments where I could see people out there get a little uncomfortable. And I actually thought that's sort of the lesson objective for today. I think it's important that we all get a little uncomfortable, because the very fact that you're here means that you're privileged. And in that respect, the question for today is not just whether we walk out of here, had a good day, shared an experience, created an echo chamber for reform. The question is what we do about that. You know, several people shouted out, Tony and others gave a call out to all the legislators and asked them to step up and take on the tough fights, and there will be tough challenges. But I got to say something else. You know, I admire people who run for public office, put themselves through the process. It's not an easy time for that. And I hope that each one of them will call forth the better angels in their soul to make sure that this state moves forward with the kind of dispatch and commitment that's necessary. But that depends on all of us insisting on that. Those people work for us. And those of you who are unwilling to take the fight, those of you who want to go to a kumbaya solution for education reform, you're not going to make it easy for those inside the legislature and inside the government who know how important this is. So the most important takeaway today is that if we don't, all of us, double down our efforts to change the world for these kids, then shame on us. Because we know what's right in this fight. We know what has to be done. We know it won't be easy. But those of you who are in business, those of you when these legislators come to you and say, I need to raise some money, I need your help, what you got to say to them is not, well, look out for my business or take care of my tax rate. You got to say, I'm with you if your #1 agenda item is education for the kids of Louisiana. No, I mean that deeply. I mean that deeply. Because I've seen it too often. I've talked to too many people in too many states who say amen and then go about their business, who's instead of saying, you know, basically what I need is some abatement on this rule or some change on this tax or to be able to expand my business. All of those things matter. But if we don't insist on a government that echoes our values, then we're not going to get the government that we need for this country. And it's really critical that we get behind these people. Now, when I talk to you today, I talk to you at a time of enormous challenge in this country. Our unemployment rate is stuck at an unacceptably high number. Our underemployment rate is even worse than that. We're looking at deficits as far as the human eye can see. We have mandates, commitments like Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, state and local pensions that we have no clue how to fund. We're mortgaging our children's future as we speak today. The gap between the haves and the have-nots keeps growing as the middle class gets hollowed out. Those are serious challenges. But I submit to you today, in the burden of my remarks today, none of those challenges are as threatening to the future of this country as is our failure to educate our kids to the level that they will need to be educated to in the 21st century. That is the principal challenge in this country. Now, think about that. We got a presidential election coming up, and every now and again somebody will say a few words about education, but you would not know it is the #1 challenge and priority for this country. If we don't get that right, the America we know and love, not just Louisiana, the America we know and love will not be the America our children live in. This is a pivotal time. See, what people don't understand is two things about education they don't understand. One, it creeps up on you. See, it takes 13 years before a kid's education is all screwed up, even though we now know there are kids here in Baton Rouge in the 3rd grade who are not going to graduate from high school. And what future are those kids going to have? But because it happens slowly, unlike unemployment, which stares us in the face, we don't pay remotely the attention that we need to pay. It should be the #1 issue, because in the end, it is a long-term solution to all the other challenges. Second thing we don't understand, and this is critical, is there are two dramatically different forces in the world than when most of us in this room grew up. One is the impact technology has had on our economy, and second, the impact globalization. When I started public schools in New York City, in inner city New York, in Brooklyn, Over 60% of this country's workforce were high school dropouts. Today it is 6% and declining. And because of technology and globalization, we've moved from an agricultural society to an industrial society, and now we're in a knowledge-based global economy. And so the skills that kids will need to compete and succeed are entirely different, and we're not even remotely taking that into account. And as a result, what we are doing is sitting here today at all levels, massively underpreparing kids for the challenges of the 21st century. Those stories that Tony and others said about people throughout the world, they understand that education is going to separate the sheep from the goat as we go forward in the 21st century knowledge-based global economy. And great American countries, people I know well, tell me if they can't find the talent here, they will go elsewhere. It's not that they want to go elsewhere. It's that in order to remain competitive, they have to go elsewhere. And when you see what's going on in countries throughout the world, in China and India and Brazil and elsewhere, where they're doubling down on education because they see that as the way to successfully transform their societies. You saw it happen in Singapore. You heard that Shanghai led the way. When you see those things, realize, again, it may not happen in 5 years. Maybe in the next 5 years, turning around the economy will still seem paramount. But while we're doing that, if we ignore this, we will erode the country that we have come to love so very much. Now, the current trajectory in education is unsustainable. And you've got to understand this. It is unsustainable. If you look at where we are today, if we had an honest high school graduation rate, see, Governor Bush mentioned it, but it goes right by people. Right now in America, it's about 70% of our kids. So right there, 3 out of 10 kids, often, as Howard and others have said, kids who grow up in poverty, often children of color, but others. 3 out of 10 kids don't even finish high school. What's their hope in a knowledge-based global economy? But of the 7 out of 10 who do, half of them are not prepared for college. We're kidding ourselves. As my friend Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, said, we are lying to our children and their families, because if they get out of high school not ready for college, then what happens is they go to college, they fall behind, it doesn't work, and so we're playing a game. Once we have an honest graduation rate, you will realize that today in America, about 1/3 to 40% of our kids are actually ready for college or careers in the 21st century. That is not sustainable. Now, the other point we have to realize is it's not because we didn't invest. Nobody believes more than I do that we should spend more on education if we spend it wisely. But from 1970 to 2010, in real dollars, constant dollars, non-inflated dollars, we have increased our spend in America by 2.5 times in that 40-year period. Okay, so every dollar we spent in 1970, we spend $2.50 today. We have doubled the number of adults, mostly teachers, 75% increase in teachers during that time period, but also guidance counselors, psychologists, paraprofessionals, and others. And despite the 2.5 times much money, 2 times as many adults, our results are essentially flat. Any business that made those kind of investments would have shut down a long time ago. But as a result, we are now at a point where money is not going to be the easiest thing to change the system. What we really need to think about is significant, substantial reform. Now, the other issue that came up this morning, I want to say a word about this because this is a complicated issue. People, from the day I took this job, people told me, you know, Chancellor, you will never fix education in America until we fix poverty in America. We had a discussion about that this morning. But let me tell you something, I'm absolutely convinced those people have it 180 degrees backward. We will never fix poverty in America until we fix education. And it is long past due. It is long past due that we stop making excuses. I'm not foolish. I grew up in public housing in a rather dysfunctional family, if I can be honest with you for a moment. What the hell are you laughing about? Those people who know me well, like John and Mark, they know whereof I speak here. In all seriousness, I know the challenges, and I wish every kid grew up with every advantage in life. But you know, families send us the best kids they have to educate. And sure, there are challenges. And sure, we need to spend more money on prenatal care. And sure, we need to invest on good health care for young kids. And we've got to deal with these issues. But in the end, when a kid starts school, the chance to transform that kid's life is so powerful. Those 13 years can change the game. They changed the game in my life. I went from growing up in public housing in Astoria to working in the most public house in America, the West Wing of President Clinton's White House. That happened because teachers in Astoria didn't set lower expectations for me, because I came from a family that was poor, a family where no one had gone to college. They didn't set lower expectations for me because they thought, well, he had a bad hand to play, so we shouldn't expect too much. And I thank God every day that those teachers said to me, don't let anybody tell you that where you came from will decide in this country where you're going to. And as a result of that, I am here today because of those teachers in Astoria, Queens. Look, if you look today, low-income African-American kids in Detroit, and compare them to low-income African-American kids in Boston or New York City, right today, in those school systems, low-income African-American kids in Detroit are 2 to 2.5 years behind those kids in New York and Chicago. That's not about poverty. That's not about single families. That's about education. It's not like the kids in New York are remotely where they need to be. But this is doable. I have a school in New York called Harlem Success. It's up in Harlem, New York. It's almost 100% African-American Latino kids. It's about 80% free and reduced lunch. It is expected to perform at a level of about 40 to 45% proficiency. It performs at over 90% proficiency. It competes with gifted and talented schools, schools that admit, based on a test, that get the highest performing youngsters in the city, and this school competes at the same level. That's not about race, and it's not about poverty. It's about the power of education. I'm not foolish. This is not easy to do, and I want to talk some about why I think we don't do things the right way. But this is doable if we're willing to do the things that will transform the system. And too often, we tinker around the edges. We put in place a program, and I'm all for the various programs. But the question is, are we prepared to fundamentally restructure the delivery system? Because the delivery system today is broken. It's broken across the board, no place more so than for those kids who need it most.